Morning, everyone. We're happy to have you. Welcome to our Agriculture Economic Development Planning Community of Practice. Today's topic, what you need to know about uses permitted in prime agricultural areas. So today's agenda is as follows. Our COP will run from 10 a.m. until 12 noon. But first, we'd like to have our territorial acknowledgement with Carolyn Pewdeborough.
Thank you, Austin. So while we meet today on a virtual platform, I'd like to take a moment to recognize the unique and enduring relationships that exist between Indigenous people and their traditional territories. To acknowledge these traditional territories is to recognize their longer history and one that predates the establishment of the earliest European colonies. Our communities are located on historic homelands of numerous nations across this land. So today, as part of the territorial acknowledgement, I'd like to make today's audience aware that November 5th to 11th marks Ontario's 8th annual Treaties Recognition Week. So in 2016, Ontario designated the first week of November as the Treaties Recognition Week. This was done as part of the province's response to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada's calls to action. And it's one important piece of really advancing reconciliation in Ontario. So Treaty Recognition Week is a time where we can recognize and reflect on the importance of treaties as well as their meetings. These agreements, some of them were signed more than a century ago, are still relevant today and articulate our responsibilities as treaty people. They are the foundation that supports the ongoing relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. The province is covered by 46 treaties and other agreements such as land purchases. Understanding the spirit and intent of treaty relationships is important for building relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities. You can visit ontario.ca/treaties to help build an understanding of treaties rights, treaty relationships, and their relevance today. I know I reside amongst the Williams Treaties area, and when I was doing research a few years ago, I learned that at the time the payment, I think, for the treaty worked out to about $125 per treaty member, which for their treaty rights or their Williams Treaty. So I encourage you to find out if you live in an area that it has a treaty and learn more about that treaty as well. So please join me as we let this acknowledgement serve as a reminder of the past and the ongoing harms of residential schools and colonialism and the importance of learning about treaty rights and treaty relationships. Thank you. I'll pass it back to you, Austin.
Thanks, Carolyn. That was great. So now I'd like to just let you know, what is agricultural economic development and planning community of practice? Well, this community of practice, much of the expertise is in this virtual room. So we encourage you to share either by asking questions of our speakers or sharing what you know with the group. Go ahead, Carolyn.
So as you can see by the number of participants, we've had a very high interest in the community of practice today. You can see the map that I'm showing on the right side of the screen. Has a little bit of a count of the number of people and where they're coming from, and it's all over the province. So it's fantastic we've had such an interest in that. And so just to set a few ground rules for the day today, we have muted your microphones and shut off your video. And that's in order to make sure we save bandwidth and we have a smooth meeting. If you do have questions, they will be accepted via the Slido app. I did just put a link into the chat that'll take you directly to the Slido. On the next screen, you'll also have a QR code where if you have a second device, you can point it at the screen and add it onto your phone if you don't want to use the same device. In Slido, you can actually put a thumbs up, and that votes the questions up, and that'll help us decide from when we get to the Q&A part at the end, which questions to answer. One of my colleagues, Drew, he has been working quite hard, quite diligently to answer questions within the app. I know I can see his answers on my phone. It doesn't seem to work as well when I'm looking on a computer screen. So you may want to use that code I'll show you next, that QR code to shoot your phone at. This webinar is being recorded and the materials will be shared at the Community of Practice website. And we do a follow-up email to everyone who's registered to give you that link directly in the email, but just so you know, yes, it's being recorded. Yes, the materials will be shared. All right, here's the QR code that I had mentioned. So this is how we'll be taking questions. As you can see, the chat is quite busy, so it'll be hard for us to track questions. So if you use your phone and you just can open your picture app, shoot it at the screen right now, and you should be able to open right into the Slido application. If you want to just type in slido.com and the join code is permitted uses, and then you can enter your questions there, and then please have a look, see what questions are there, and you can vote them up as well. We do have a number of programs. We just want to make those on the line aware of, and we will, in our follow-up email, we will have links to these as well. So the Veterinary Incentive Program has been launched. The governments of Canada and Ontario are investing $8 million to support the mental wellness of farmers and their families. With this commitment, saw the wrong thing. So this is the mental health commitment. This is the 24/7 Farmer Wellness Initiative. You can see the 1-800 number on there. This is a professional line that provides farmers with free mental health counseling services, and it's people who are trained to understand agriculture. So that line is there. There's also a website of support. There's the Guardian Network, and the Guardian Network is really made up of trained volunteers who interact with farmers, whether it's through their work, their volunteer activities, or through the community. And the CMHA Ontario, so the Canadian Mental Health Association, they train these guardians to be equipped with strategies to help those who they see struggling with mental health. So it's a really great program, and we want you to be aware these sorts of supports are available, and you can share that within your own communities. In the Know is a mental health literacy program, and it's designed specifically for farmers or their families that, those who are working directly in the agriculture sector. And it helps people identify things like such as stress, depression, anxiety, and learn how to start that conversation about mental health. And it's a 3-hour workshop that's free. So for more details on any of these programs, that agriculturewellnessontario.ca is available for you. The next one is, the one I leaped into the first time was the Veterinary Incentive Program. And this is to ensure livestock farmers and large animal owners in underserviced areas can access timely veterinary care. The program will provide grants up to $50,000 over 5 years for up to 100 new licensed veterinarians who provide care to animals such as cattle, sheep, goats, and poultry. And this program is being delivered by the Agricultural Adaptation Council as the delivery mechanism. So if you Google Veterinarian Incentive Program, you'll find that, and we will provide those links in that follow-up email. Our next one is around the maple syrup program. So the federal government, so Canada and Ontario, OMAFRA, have partnered to provide $1 million to support the province's maple syrup industry. This one opens on November 9th. So it opens shortly. Expenses can be backdated to that April 1st, 2023. And we wanted to make you aware that the Soil and Crop Improvement Association are delivering this initiative, and they are offering training sessions for producers to be able to sign up and learn more about the sessions. There's actually one this evening from 7 till 8:30. There's another one Monday night and another one next Thursday night. So these sessions are virtual. They will be delivered in English. There's support for French applications as well, and you can contact the OSCIA, so the Ontario Soil and Crop Improvement Association, to gather more information on that. Okay. Our next program, or our final program we're going to highlight today, is a recent announcement around $8 million through the SCAP program, so the Sustainable Canadian Agriculture Partnership, to support fruit growers. The Growing Future Opportunities Initiative will enable eligible apple and tender fruit producers with access to cost share funding so they can purchase and plant varieties better to meet market demand. So that was just announced earlier in the last few days, and there's a news release that has those details, and eligible producers will be contacted directly by AgriCorp to make them aware of the program. Okay, I think that's all the program announcements, so I'll turn it back to you, Austin.
Great. Thanks, Carolyn. So good morning again, everyone. I will be your moderator today. My name's Austin Brown, and I'm from the Ontario Federation of Agriculture, and I focus on the Ag Active Policy portfolio. So a little bit more detail about our agenda today. This COP will consist of the welcome you just experienced from 10 a.m. until 10:15 by myself and Carolyn Peterborough. Followed by our diversified uses for a thriving prime agricultural area from 10:15 until 11 a.m. with Helma Gertz and Nancy Rutherford from OMAFRA. Then we will have our municipal best practices from 11 until 11:30 a.m. with Emily Souza, Grant County Planning and Development. That will be at 11. Nelson Silvera from the town of Essex, Economic Development at 11:10, and Meredith Maywood, County of Oxford, Tourism Oxford at 11:20. Next, we will field questions and answers from 11:30 until 11:45. Please be aware that we have over 550 people participating today. I would highly recommend that you do not use the chat, but instead use our wonderful tool Slido. So questions can be answered at slido.com, hashtag permitted uses. We have also posted a link in the chat, or you can use the QR code that was on screen and may also be on screen when you need it. And participants may vote up the questions they would like to see answered during the webinar. And then finally, we will end with our wrap-up, focusing on future training needs and the evaluation at 11:45 until noon with, again, myself and Carolyn Peterborough. So now I am happy to pass over to our first presenters of Helma and Nancy. And I can tell that we are all very excited to hear what they have to say.
Good morning, everyone. Friends and colleagues. Thank you so much, Austin and Carolyn, for all those wonderful tips and information and introduction. Our OMAFRA team is really pleased to deliver this session and through the community of practice today. And to so many of you, our partners across the province, the entire province, isn't technology incredible? We really do encourage that you sign into Slido because we are going to have some fun interactive activities for you during the presentation. Today, our team will be providing an overview of provincial policies and guidance on permitted uses in the prime agricultural areas. And we do feel that this is very timely training given this overwhelming response and interest and the diverse proposals that many of you are now experiencing in prime agricultural areas. Today, we're going to cover the rationale for supporting diversification in prime ag areas, current provincial policies and guidelines, categories of permitted uses and tips for differentiating them, some really great examples of implementation by municipalities and best practices, and of course, emerging issues. So for some of you today, this is going to be provide a quick refresher for you on some of these topics. But for those of you that are new to the subject, we're really hopeful that the presentation will entice you to learn more and do take the time to review the provincial guideline in more detail. The guideline is a very useful tool for municipalities in considering and implementing permitted uses in your agricultural areas. But your municipality also needs to be prepared with planning policies to assist your own community to understand the approaches regarding permitted uses. The opportunities are great, and we all need to do our part to encourage diversification of prime agricultural areas, realizing that now off-farm income is required by many farm owners to support a two-income family norm. And rather than an exodus from the farm to earn additional income, diversification can enable people to stay and may attract new people that can generate opportunities from the farm without affecting farm productivity. Our objective is to create a thriving and prosperous prime agricultural area with a full range of opportunities that would help to attract a new generation of farmers and generate jobs, help to create a strong rural economy and diverse tax base, rural services made available in the rural areas, and overall really to help generate awareness and appreciation of local agriculture and the businesses that they have to offer, so many. Researchers recently at the University of Guelph in 2022 interviewed farmers to gain more insight into why they create on-farm diversified uses on their operations. So if you refer to the slide, there's a few tidbits of information and quotes that were garnered out of these interviews. But notably, farmers with an OFDU reported approximately 3 more jobs that are created within the family unit alone and 9 jobs outside of the family unit. This is very significant for our rural communities. So as a quick review, we do need to turn back to our current provincial policy and the provincial policy statement. As listed here, the policies identify the permitted uses in prime agricultural areas, which are agricultural uses, agriculture-related uses, and on-farm diversified uses. These are foundational policies for the municipalities, and as Policy 231 states, prime agricultural areas shall be protected for the long-term use for agriculture. Municipalities can achieve this by designating your agricultural areas in your official plans. Certainly, we are aware that there are proposed changes to the policies in the draft PPS that are underway, and you can see in the black box, it does identify some of the proposed changes to date. In this case, though, today our focus is the current provincial permitted uses policies and the guideline document. Thanks, Carolyn. So the policies in the PPS, other provincial plans, and the provincial guidelines are really about balancing our objectives of maintaining Ontario's best agricultural areas over a long term and supporting a thrive agricultural industry and a rural economy. The guidelines were issued in 2016 to help municipalities, decision makers, farmers, and others interpret provincial policy in the PPS, the Growth Plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, and the Greenbelt Plan. Prior to the release of the guideline, we do know that policies were interpreted differently from one municipality to another, and the result was usually that permitted uses in one municipality may not, in fact, align across the road in an adjoining municipality. So this did create some confusion, and one of the goals of this guideline is to increase consistency and implementation across the entire province. As such, it's very important that when you're updating your municipality's planning policy documents, such as your official plans and zoning bylaw, that they're done so according to and consistent with the provincial plans, policies, and guidelines. It is noted that the PPS does permit municipalities to develop their own criteria for permitted uses, and municipalities should realize that their approaches need to ensure and do not conflict and are consistent with the PPS policy and criteria for permitted uses. At this point in time, I'm going to turn the presentation over to my colleague, Helma. Thanks.
Good morning. everyone, and so good to have you join us today to talk about permitted uses and all the exciting opportunities. So this slide summarizes the three categories of uses and the PPS criteria that characterize each of the uses. The guidelines explain each criteria in terms of considerations and how it can be demonstrated. And if you can see the upper right-hand side of the slide, there's a green box with a number in it, and that relates back to the permitted uses guidelines. So if you want to read more, find out more, that's a handy reference. Starting with agricultural uses, they are what we think of as primary agriculture. So in other words, the growing of crops and raising of livestock. All types, sizes, and intensities of agricultural uses and normal farm practices are permitted. Agriculture-related uses are commercial and industrial uses that support and are directly related to agriculture in the area. On-farm diversified uses, which will condense to OFDUs, I'm sure, a few times today, are the most diverse category of uses, as they can be any use at all that meets the criteria listed. As flagged in orange, agricultural uses are promoted and protected in prime ag areas, in contrast with ag-related uses and OFDUs, which are permitted if they meet specific criteria. Both ARUs and OFDUs must be compatible with agriculture, because in prime ag areas, agriculture takes primacy. At times, it can be tricky discerning whether a use is an ag-related use or an on-farm diversified use. An ag-related use may be located on a farm or on a separate parcel dedicated to the ag-related use. On-farm diversified uses must be located on a farm. In terms of area limits, ag-related uses don't have any area limits as long as the use is compatible with agriculture. In contrast, OFDUs are limited in area, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. A given use can fall into more than one category depending on its specific characteristics. So let's take a farm market, for example. The portion selling produce, wine, or cider from the area would be an agriculture-related use. If other products are also sold at the farm market, like crafts or coffee, that part of the operation alone would be classified as an OFDU. So next, we'll go into a little more detail on each category of uses. As mentioned, agricultural uses are what we think of as primary agriculture. So that includes crop and livestock areas, as well as agricultural uses that are not land dependent, such as greenhouses, controlled environment agriculture, indoor mushroom production, and aquaculture. The PPS and guidelines specify that this category also includes associated buildings and structures, including the types of facilities just mentioned, livestock facilities, accommodation for full-time farm help, and value-retaining uses. Value-retaining uses maintain the quality of agricultural commodities or provide the minimum amount of processing to make an agricultural product saleable. You can see some examples here on the right-hand side. So the washing of produce, the sorting of eggs, storage of apples, or from the processing side, honey extraction and maple syrup evaporation would be considered to be agricultural uses because they provide the minimum processing to make a product saleable. Agriculture-related uses may be on a farm or a separate parcel. The provincial policy statement discourages lot creation in the prime ag area, but it does include a provision for agriculture-related uses subject to conditions. Ag-related uses are not subject to area limits. I mentioned that. And the reason is because, first and foremost, they have to be farm-related commercial or industrial uses that directly relate to farm operations in the area. For example, vegetable processing around the Holland Marsh, or perhaps a winery using grapes from the area would be an agriculture-related use. Ag-related uses must also provide products and services to farm operations as a primary activity. Some examples of commercial uses, if they meet all of the ARU criteria, are the retailing of agricultural commodities and value-added products from produce in the area, livestock and produce auctions, and farm equipment repair shops. Industrial uses could include food and beverage processors, grain elevators, farm input suppliers, flour mills, agricultural biomass pelletizers, and distribution facilities that provide services to farms in the area. Okay, I already noted that a wide variety of uses may qualify as OFDU, and we're seeing lots of creative ideas put forth by entrepreneurs, as long as all of the criteria listed on the left are met. On-farm diversified uses could relate directly to or support agriculture or be able to coexist with agriculture. While OFDUs must be located on a farm, they could, but don't have to be related to agriculture. Excuse me. Examples include agritourism, glamping, playgrounds, workshops or studios, bakeries, small-scale industrial uses, woodworking shops, professional offices, hairdressers, and even goat yoga. While the types of OFDUs are limitless, the scale is not. OFDUs are the only category of uses that have to be limited in area. In the past, municipalities used different tests to try to limit the scale of what was previously labeled secondary uses. That was the precursor to on-farm diversified uses. So, for example, some municipalities put limits on the percentage of products sold that had to be derived from the farm, the number of or place of residence of employees, or some would even look at income from secondary versus agricultural uses to ensure that the income from secondary was less. But these things really have nothing to do with the amount of land taken out of agriculture. And there's the question, and then there's the question of how exactly would you implement these? The guidelines put forward a preferred approach that directly relates back to the objectives that are listed on the slide there, to minimize land taken out of agriculture and off-site impacts, and to ensure agriculture remains the main use in prime agricultural areas. The guidelines advise that limited in area should be based on footprint occupied by the OFDU. They recognize that limited in area should be relative to property size, so the larger the farm, the larger the OFDU could be to a specified limit. Recommended area calculations are outlined on this slide, and of note is that the guidelines recommend that OFDUs be limited to 2% of the total property size to a maximum of 1 hectare. This would ensure that the OFDUs are limited in area and secondary to agriculture. I would refer you to Appendix 2 of the guidelines, which includes examples of small, medium, and large farms and how area limits for OFDUs would be calculated. The other criterion that we get a lot of questions about is how to demonstrate that agriculture-related uses and on-farm diversified uses are compatible with surrounding agricultural operations in the prime ag area. The guidelines describe in detail how to ascertain whether compatibility is achieved. For example, by asking things like, can agricultural operations in the area continue to pursue agricultural practices without impairment or inconvenience? For example, will slow-moving farm vehicles on local roads or manure spreading be impacted? Are the uses matched with available rural services? So in other words, not require the level of road access, water and wastewater servicing, utilities, and fire protection found in serviced settlement areas. Do the uses maintain the agricultural or rural character of the area, even on a cumulative basis, considering multiple permitted uses in the prime ag area? Do the uses meet all air, noise, water, and wastewater standards? Next, we'll look at an example of a multi-generational farm in Perth County, which has all categories of uses, the most delicious of which is the Stonetown artisan cheese production. The founders and owners of Stonetown are Swiss immigrant dairy farmers who make cheese from milk produced by their own herd. The milk never leaves their farm. The family brought in a master cheesemaker from Switzerland who became co-owner of the cheese factory, and then also hired a local store manager, lead in marketing and business development, and an assistant cheesemaker. Agriculture remains the dominant use on this site, with cheese production being an agriculture-related use that meets all of the PPS criteria of being farm-related, industrial, or commercial use, compatible with and does not hinder surrounding agriculture, directly related to primary agriculture in the area, and benefits from being in close proximity to farm operations. In fact, the milk is actually produced, so that's a tremendous benefit. There's a small retail store on the farm selling cheese as an agriculture-related use, and a few other things as a very small scale OFDU. From the municipality's perspective, Perth South has no settlement area, so council and the local economic development committee are big supporters of diversification in the prime ag area for the jobs and economic opportunities they bring. Over to Nancy.
I'm back. Thanks, Helma. I'm not off the hook yet, right? We're going to switch up and switch gears a little bit and pull you into some fun activities now. So this is a collage just that we wanted to put up and show you. It really does depict a world of opportunities and uses that could be permitted in our prime agricultural areas. And what we're going to do is have an interactive Slido activity for you to participate in now, including 4 slides. And it's really meant to reinforce the concepts that you've just heard through Helma's talk, and hope you've been paying attention. So next slide, Carolyn. Thank you very much. What I'm going to do is give you sort of an overview of what you're looking at, because it's very difficult to understand what's happening on the ground by an aerial or by a picture. And what you need to do is, through your Slido, really just select which type of use or uses the operation you view may fall under. So this is a picture of a farm business in Hamilton Township in Northumberland County. And it's difficult to see all aspects, but it includes cropping activity, a pick your own, a farm market with bakery, a maze and a playground, and the market sells local and other items, as mentioned, baked goods. So take a few seconds, if you would, and try to select your best guesses, and then I'll go through what we feel this represents. Okay, we have a lot of material to get through and a few more slides, so I'm going to just jump right in. It does appear that the majority, or a large number of you, 81%, feel this is an OFTU predominantly. And as Helma mentioned and was very clear, uses can certainly fall into a number of categories, such as the cheese operation that she provided as an example. And this one is another example of that. In fact, it has agricultural uses, which includes the crops, the pick your own, and the maize, which in fact is cultivated and produces a harvestable crop from the farm operation. There's also agriculture related use, so the portion of the farm market that's selling the produce and from the local area, which supports the farm operation. And certainly it has on-farm diversified uses that include a portion of the farm market selling other items such as bakery goods, the playground, and important to note, the parking facility. It would only be the parking area portion that's attributable to the OFT use itself. Now keep in mind that although the OFTU may only occupy a small footprint, it does generate numerous jobs for local residents and a farm income supplement that we talked about earlier in the in the beginning of our session. So the next example for you to take a look at and make your best guesses. Oh, sorry, just to remind people, you can do more than one vote. Yeah. All right. Sorry about the dinging. This is the lamb farm. This is actually in Thunder Bay, Nebing, which is 30 minutes outside of Thunder Bay. And this is Borderlands farm operation. They raise sheep for both meat and fiber. And they added a wood whip mill manufacturing component in 2023 that produces yarn goods. So take a second and do your best guess. Okay, very good. Actually, good job, everybody. It is in fact has both components of an agricultural use through the lamb raising operation and then the on-site wool manufacturing shop. The agriculture related use is the wool production that obviously is supporting the primary agricultural use. So it's the two which got around 80%, both of them vote up. Our next little example for you is coming up. Okay, so this depicts a tent, a temporary tent facility on a farm, and it really could be represent various events. It could be a wedding, it could be a harvest dinner, could be an organization or group gathering. So if you want to do your voting now, then we can share what this is. Okay. Looks good, actually. So yes, this would be an OFDU, or considered non-farm diversified use, if it does meet, this is the big if it does meet the scale and criteria limits through the guideline of an OFDU. If it does not, and it should go beyond, then this is quite possibly considered a non-agricultural use, which 40% of you have also included in your voting. And the proponent then may need to undertake further approvals, which such as could include an official plan amendment in your municipality. So good job on that one. Our next little test for you is our last one. So be patient, and thanks for participating with us. This is a bison du Nord in Earlton, outside of Temiskaming Shores, North Ontario, which I had the pleasure recently to visit and experience. It's absolutely fantastic. If you're ever up in Northern Ontario and Temiskaming, try and hit it. They have just an adorable operation here with the raising of the bison, and they also sell meat in a small retail store you can see in the fridge in the picture, as well as they do have some artwork, local artwork they promote, and then their own books on their history and a few other promotional materials. So okay, yes, these are as well very good voting. It is an agricultural use, clearly, with the raising of the bison. And then it is an agricultural related use because they sell meat in a small retail store, and it's meat that they've produced. And it does have a very small component of on-farm diversified use with their small store that includes other products in the store, such as artwork and the books and pressed or processed leather goods. So there you go. I hope that helps doing a hands-on to just get a sense of the fact that you can have numerous uses. It's not always going to be one or the other. And you really do need to look closely at what's happening on the ground in each case and understand the objectives of the operation, what they're trying to produce, and then equally look very closely at the criteria under each of these categories. So I think that should help in your future examinations of proposals. And now I'll switch gears back to Helma. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I'm going to launch right into implementation of permitted uses by municipalities. There are a variety of different land use planning tools that can be used to implement provincial policies on permitted uses. Uses that are clearly compatible and may be permitted as of right, in other words, without further land use planning approvals, might only require a building permit or a special event permit. Other uses may be permitted as of right, but be subject to municipal bylaws addressing things such as noise, hours of operation, signage, or site plan control to ensure the operation fits in with the rural character of the area. Still others may require a zoning bylaw amendment or an official plan amendment, perhaps requiring evidence that the proposed use is compatible, for example, by requiring a traffic study to be completed. At each step, the cost and time increases for proponents. So the ultimate goal is really to match the planning tool with the degree of risk associated with the use. Okay, next slide is again focused on municipalities. What are some of the standard practices that municipalities use to implement permitted uses policies? The first at the top of the list is ensuring that official plans and zoning bylaws are up to date and consistent with provincial policies. In the Greenbelt, the Greenbelt plan includes a policy that specifies that permitted uses must be based on OMAFRA's guidance. Outside the Greenbelt, municipalities have flexibility to develop their own criteria as long as they achieve the same objective as the provincial policy. Collaboration between land use planning and economic development to support diversification, I think, is something we're going to hear from the municipal speakers about, and that's really standard practice. Really important is to advise proponents to consider the financial implications of property tax and building code requirements before proceeding, because they can have a major impact on the economics of a proposed use. From the best practices perspective, the kinds of ideas that have that deserve a gold star would be at the top of the list, having really clear rules around permitted uses that are developed through collaboration and communication between ag advisory committees, the farming community council, other departments, to ensure that the rules reflect community interests, and that helps everyone out. The various bullets to follow are, I believe, going to be covered by our municipal speakers. So I think I will leave it at that. There are a couple of emerging issues that we wanted to spend some time on today. And we know these two issues, battery storage facilities and housing on farms, are topics that people indicated they wanted to hear about in the pre-training poll. So battery storage facilities are new, basically new to Ontario. And so I'm going to discuss them in some detail here. But please keep in mind that OMAFRA's perspectives are to be confirmed based on future discussions with Municipal Affairs and Housing and the Ministry of Energy. Battery storage systems, battery energy storage systems, often condensed to BESS, capture surplus energy generated at one point in time, normally during off-peak periods, and then they release it to the electricity grid or to users at another point in time when the energy is needed, typically peak periods. It pairs really well with intermittent technologies like wind or solar to match supply and demand. The picture that you see on the slide is of a battery storage facility in the UK that captures energy from nearby wind and solar and releases it during high demand. The facility was built beside a substation to connect to the distribution system. Battery storage sites may also include access roads, parking areas, and fencing. So energy procurement, whether for battery storage or other technologies, is led by the Independent Electricity System Operator under the direction of the Minister of Energy. The IESO has issued 2 RFPs recently, since 2022, and another is expected in 2024. Large-scale projects are not identified as permitted uses. Large-scale energy projects are not identified as permitted uses in prime agricultural areas in the PPS. The current PPS only allows for ground-mounted solar facilities in prime ag areas if they are on-farm diversified uses, in other words, small scale. Battery storage facilities can share the same trait of being land extensive. So it's our view that they should be treated the same and only permitted as on-farm diversified uses. The proposed new provincial planning statement recognizes this, and if it's approved as per the draft that's currently out for consultation, it would treat both technologies the same. So both on ground-mounted solar and land-extensive battery storage would be permitted as on-farm diversified uses only. It's conceivable that large-scale facilities could be considered on a case-by-case basis in the prime ag area, subject to meeting the provincial policy statement's criteria for limited non-agricultural uses in the prime ag area. The planners in the group will recognize that Section 236 of the PPS addresses these limited non-agricultural uses in prime ag areas. And that policy is applied to uses that aren't permitted, but they could potentially be considered subject to conditions, including that alternative locations outside the prime ag area are evaluated. And if there are no options in the prime ag area, then lower priority agricultural lands need to be considered. We know that some municipalities are requiring official plan amendments for battery storage systems in prime ag area on the premise that the official plan doesn't identify battery storage as a permitted use. So an OPA could be needed to conform. In addition, the IESO approval process requires proponents to secure a municipal support resolution before construction can proceed. So this gives municipalities a significant opportunity to influence facility siting. The proposals for battery storage facilities that we have seen to date in Ontario range in size from less than 1 acre to 120 acres. Under the expedited RFP process, the recent one, the IESO has already awarded contracts for 15 battery storage projects, 3 of which are in the prime ag area. The other 12 projects tend to be small. They're less than 2 acres, and they are located on industrial, urban, rural lands, or employment lands. And it looks like the forthcoming RFP, the LT1 projects, seem to be larger in scale and more frequently proposed in prime ag areas. OMAFRA is connecting with the Ministry of Energy, and we hope to have the opportunity to provide input into future rules regarding agricultural considerations in facility siting. We also heard from a lot of you that you wanted to hear about housing on farms as a permitted uses. So here's a brief rundown. The current provincial policy statement identifies housing for farm workers as an agricultural use when the size and nature of the operation requires additional employment, but it's silent on the primary farmhouse. The guidelines, however, do clarify that both the main farmhouse and housing for farm workers are agricultural uses. So these must be permitted in prime ag areas to be consistent with the PPS. So under the proposed new provincial planning statement, the policies have been clarified, the draft policies have been clarified to indicate that the primary farmhouse is also an agricultural use, and it continues to recognize that housing for farm workers is also an agricultural use as per the current situation. And in addition, it permits 2 additional residential units without severances subject to conditions. So we're still awaiting the final provincial planning statement, and so policies are TBD. We'll see what they look like in the final form. Our expectation is that guidelines will follow the final provincial planning statement policies. Okay, so that concludes this portion of the training. And in the interest of completeness, I did add 3 slides that you can check after this event. And they're in the appendix, and they deal with how to tell the difference between value retentive and value added uses, how to deal with temporary uses, typically on farm diversified uses, and beyond permitted uses. So in the situation where uses don't fit into the permitted uses in prime ag areas. OMAFRA contact information is provided on that last slide, the black one, Carolyn. And you can refer to it to get in touch with economic development or land use planning staff. And for questions related to agricultural land use planning, OMAFRA's rural planners are your first point of contact. I will leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Helma and Nancy. That was fantastic. I am now very happy to introduce Emily from the County of Brant for her brief presentation on supporting permitted uses in prime agricultural areas. Emily, feel free.
Perfect. Thanks, Austin. So thanks everyone for tuning in and for having me back at the Community of Practice. As mentioned, my name is Emily Sousa and I am a development planner with the County of Brant. So my portfolio over the course of my career has mainly focused on agricultural files. And here at the County of Brant, I'll be sharing some of our best practices and lessons learned for supporting permitted uses in prime ag areas. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go relatively quickly here with my presentation today. I'll be talking briefly about the context of agriculture in the county, best practices for permitted uses in our policies, applications, and processes. And then lastly, I'll be talking about a resource that I put together with my team at the University of Guelph and OMAFRA for helping municipalities to assess the merits of OFDU proposals specifically. Next slide, please. So in the County of Brant, we are no stranger to agriculture. We have roughly 930 farm operators actively farming roughly 150,000 acres of farmland in the area. The agriculture and agri-food system encompass several industries, including the farm input and service supplier industries, primary agriculture, food and beverage processing, food distribution, retail, wholesale, and food service industries, as well as various on-farm diversified uses. Next slide. So we really can't talk about permitted uses until we talk about farmland and where these uses are permitted. So based on this map above, we see that over 70% of farmlands in the county are considered to be prime lands or classes 1 to 3, with various pockets of classes 4 to 5 scattered throughout our boundaries. Next slide. But when we get to designating or protecting this land, we don't distinguish between what is prime and what is not. In Brant, we only have agriculture, and all of these lands are all afforded the same level of protection and permissions in terms of uses and zoning. So this is important to note, as I know in my previous experience, I've noted some municipalities have separate designations or zones for different classes of agricultural land, such as secondary agriculture, and having different permissions for the zone depending on the land type. And this has just caused some grief for farmers over time, as it leads to inconsistency as well as opens up lands to more incompatible non-farm development. So in the county, we've taken the approach just to call it agriculture. And I note this as important because, as noted on the slide, our average lot size for lands designated agriculture in the county are only 13.7 hectares, which is unfortunately quite small. So we've got many farmers with operations spanning across multiple lots, across multiple concessions, and fragmentation of the land base is a big concern. So our priority is protecting what we have, but it's important to note that when you're dealing with smaller lot sizes, it can make viability for farmers more challenging. And of course, permitting different use is incredibly important, but as well as also very challenging, for example, when it comes to size and scale. Next slide, please. So briefly, what did the county do when it came to our official plan and zoning bylaw? Well, we quite literally adopted provincial policy and definitions and criteria from the OMAFRA guidelines, almost word for word, into these policies, and it's worked quite well for us. I know folks talk about how the PPS or the Planning Act is their daily go-to when dealing with planning applications, and of course that's true. I know for us, the County of Brant, and myself especially, the document I refer to the most is the OMAFRA guidelines, as it presents an awesome case study examples and situational considerations that help us navigate how to responsibly permit different uses, even with our streamlined policies in place. Next slide, please. So the county has recently completed and adopted our new official plan, which is yet to be approved by the province. Relative to our old official plan, we have adopted quite a bit of provincial guidance into the plan directly, such as permitting ag-related, and OFDUs in our agricultural designations, as well as having clarifying policies which identify that farm worker housing is in fact considered a permitted agricultural use. So I know Helma just spoke to this, that, to do so otherwise would be inconsistent. In my previous role as a policy analyst at the OFA and kind of doing municipal scans of zoning bylaws, we've seen some municipalities actually omit this use from their official plans or zoning bylaws, requiring farmers to undergo those OPAs or ZBAs to permit housing for workers in areas where it really should be permitted as an ag use. And we 100% credit the OMAFRA guidelines for the direction. Next slide, please. So to implement the policies of our official plan, we have our zoning bylaw, which we'll be going through a comprehensive review shortly. Essentially, we permit ag uses, ag-related, and OFDUs as of right within our agricultural zones, with definitions and criteria taken straight from the PPS and OMAFRA guidelines. We've done this so farmers can proceed straight to the building permit stage for a wide variety of agricultural uses, or to the site plan process for a variety of ag-related or OFDUs if they meet qualified criteria. Something Brant does as well in zoning is define what a farming operation is and require that ag-related uses and OFDUs are only permitted on farm operations. So we do require official documentation of a farm business registration number or a startup exemption letter from Agricor from proponents to permit their use in order to proceed. Next slide, please. So again, just some specific examples for our ag-related uses and OFDUs. Most of it is taken straight from the guidelines. It's important to note that we aren't perfect at Brant, even though we like to think we are. We're quite proud of what we've done, but we do know that there is room for improvement. Even going through some projects as of late, my team and I notice some policies work well, maybe ones that don't work so well. And this is just a note for municipalities. There's always opportunity to improve. We're always going through housekeeping amendments. And so we do take note of these things and try to update it as much as we can. Next slide. Okay, so how does a farmer approach the county to get approval for their project? So first, we require mandatory pre-consultation meeting. And prior to this meeting, we circulate their proposal to all internal departments, including engineering, finance, building, operations, conservation authorities, fire, economic development, and more. And this process has been incredibly valuable as it's allowed us to review the proposal, provide input, identify all costs and requirements for the proponent, and essentially build consensus and identify a pathway forward for the applicant to come forward with a complete application. So if a farmer can meet all zoning criteria for OFDUs and ag-related uses as identified in the pre-con, then our next step is to permit the use through site plan control. At Brant, we have two streams of site plan, a regular site plan control process, as most planners will know it, and a minor site plan control, which is a stream we've implemented for ag-related and OFDUs specifically. So the minor process is much more scaled back with fewer requirements and typically requires no site plan agreement or securities, as well as offered at a much lower fee at around $900 versus the normal $10,000. And this is mainly because these uses are more rural or agricultural friendly and really should be designed in a way that prioritizes the farm and surrounding operations and rehabilitation back to agricultural use. So more hefty development engineering requirements such as stormwater, grading, transportation impact, etc., aren't always as relevant versus more urbanized development. So it only makes sense to design a process which is minor in scale and matches the scope of the development that we're dealing with. And it's also helped encourage more farmers to come forward with applications without scaring them away with the very high upfront cost. Next slide, please. So for the pre-consultation, we fill out the form on the screen and check off what's necessary. And this is just a sample as there are many different possible requirements. We will list the fees, our scope of work required, and other relevant comments. We then review this package with the applicant at the meeting and essentially come to a consensus on what's required for them to move forward. And they have to submit the same proposal or something that's very similar to proceed, and they must do so within a year of the meeting. And this timeline helps to encourage the applicant to get their application together as quickly as they can, and to submit to us for review and approval, as hopefully most of the major issues will have been worked out ahead of them submitting their formal application. And just because we're always undergoing zoning bylaw amendments, housekeeping amendments here at the county, we do put that timeline on because policies do change. And so at least that year, we're able to assess it, the proposal relative to the policies that we have in place at the time. Next slide, please. So we work with economic development primarily in our pre-con and our site plan process, but also we've done a ton of work to create county-specific implementation guidelines to help farmers understand what exactly is an ag-related use or an on-farm diversified use and what's required for these projects. This also includes an OFDU marketing YouTube video, as well as our farm market guide. And through these outputs, we've had great outreach and interest and have seen various applications for things like pancake restaurants, disc golf courses, and various markets over the last couple of years. Next slide. So lastly, this is not a product of the County of Brant, but was produced by myself and my colleagues, Dr. Pam Dusling and Dr. Wayne Caldwell, as well as Helma Geertz and Drew Crinklaw at OMAFRA, while we were working on a project at the University of Guelph with support from OMAFRA to identify best practices for OFDUs in Ontario. So now the project is complete, and that report, including this tool, can be found online at Dr. Wayne Caldwell's resource website, www.waynecaldwell.ca. And I'll humbly note that this project and tool received a Plan On award from the Ontario Professional Planners Institute for its innovative research and impact on the profession. So what exactly are we looking at here? So for planners familiar with the 4 tests of a minor variance, this report debuts the 5 tests of an OFDU pre-consultation compatibility tool. And this is in Appendix A of the final report. The objective of this tool is to make it easier for municipalities and proponents to understand how to meet all 5 criteria for on-farm diversified uses, as Helma and Nancy went through earlier, and put forward an approvable proposal. So some questions are designed to encourage proponents to thoughtfully plan their OFDU to ensure all aspects of compatibility with agriculture have been considered and prioritized. Specifically, how will any proposal-specific adverse impacts on agriculture be avoided, minimized, or mitigated? And likewise, questions also encourage and assist municipalities in reviewing their requirements for OFDUs, whether for processing an individual application or even evaluating or implementing municipal-wide policy. So I'm going to briefly walk through the tool here. The first column includes the criteria for the OFDU in the guidelines, or what we refer to as the test. The next column lists considerations or questions to ask the proponent following specific references to policy sections in the guidelines to learn more or support the consideration against provincial policy. Next, there is a column to mark where you acquired the information from, whether it was the proponent, municipal document, or other, and it's mostly just for tracking your information sources. And lastly, the last column includes the information or the response you will acquire from going through this process to help you make your final assessment as to whether the proposal meets all the 5 tests of an on-farm diversified use. Next slide. So I know I went through a lot in a relatively short period of time, but that is it from me. And don't hesitate to contact me if you have any questions that come up. I've also put my colleagues, Pam Dusling and Wayne Caldwell's contact on the screen if you have questions about our research specifically. Thank you.
That was fantastic. Thank you, Emily, so much. Now we're moving on to Nelson and his presentation from the town of Essex.
Hello, can everybody hear me okay? Great. Thank you to the Ontario Ministry of Food, Agriculture and Rural Affairs and the Ontario Federation of Agriculture. I know a lot of the discussion today has been around policy. Hopefully we can lighten things up a little bit with some of the unique initiatives that the town of Essex is doing to support agritourism development within our community. Next slide, please. So to give you some idea in terms of where we're located within the province, we're located in almost the most southern point within the province on the shores of Lake Erie. So we stretch from the middle of Essex County down to a town called Colchester. We share line of latitude with the areas of California, French Riviera, Rome, and Italy. We are home to the Harrow Research and Development Center. the largest greenhouse research complex facility in North America, and nearly 70% of the wineries located in the Lake Erie North Shore appellation of Ontario are producing in the town of Essex. Another unique fact about where we are geographically in Lake Erie's North Shore area, we have the longest growing season and the highest number of heat units, which really speaks to the atmosphere that we are within Ontario, and the agritourism development that's happening within our region. Next slide, please. So what is agritourism? We define it similar to what the previous speakers have talked about, is really aligning ourselves with the permitted guidelines from OMAFRA. It's ancillary farm uses, related uses which promote the enjoyment, education, activities related to farm life, and agricultural operations and production. So that can be anything from farm stays to farm markets, winery tours, tasting experience, farm to table, cafe or restaurant, pick your owns, craft breweries, wineries, harvest tour experience featuring hay rides or corn mazes, an on-farm cooking class using local grown ingredients. So to give you an idea of the types of businesses that we have within our region, a lot of wineries that have restaurants, tasting rooms, and host events. We also have cideries and a number of different agritourism businesses that attract a variety of different visitors, not only within the province, but through Michigan and Ohio due to our geographic location. Next slide, please. So to give you some more information on the agritourism value chain, agritourism as a sector falls within the food tourism value chain, and I'll credit Culinary Tourism Alliance, who we work with closely on our agritourism work. There are a robust ecosystem of businesses within your community that can mutually benefit through networking and collaboration. So growers can partner with accommodations, restaurants, farmers markets, retailers to really enhance the agritourism experience, create jobs, and really stimulate the local economy in rural Ontario. Next slide, please. So to give you some background in terms of where we started in agritourism, we were noticing that a lot of our tourism destinations, our operators, and a lot of the farmers were really interested in agritourism, and a lot of the tourism within our municipality focused on agriculture. So instead of trying to be everything to everybody, we really wanted to get focused with agritourism. And we really, I don't want to say we put all our eggs in one basket, but we really tried to be more focused in our approach when promoting and really focusing on a specific aspect of tourism, and that being agritourism. So council identified this concept of agritourism as part of their priority in the 2019 to 2022 corporate strategic plan. The town of Essex received some funding from the Tourism Economic Development and Recovery Fund in the midst of COVID, and in 2021, and we developed this agritourism development strategy with Culinary Tourism Alliance, which really set the framework moving forward for us as a municipality, and how we could support producers and agritourism operators on the ground. So the engagement began in early 2021 with over 50 agriculture, tourism, and community stakeholders. We hosted workshops and different community engagement events in order to get some feedback from them, and their participation was crucial in developing this plan. Next slide, please. So what did that plan recognize? Recognize some priority areas that we could focus on to really heighten awareness around agritourism and really promote agritourism as an economic driver for not only our businesses, but for our community in general. So some of the things that it looked at was fostering an enabling policy environment, creating awareness around agritourism rules and regulations, fostering networking at the operator level, driving traffic to agritourism businesses. That could be through marketing and some of the campaigns that we were doing, creating an agritourism ambassador program, which I'll go into a little bit later, and then empowering businesses to improve their online presence. We hosted a variety of different workshops and brought in guest speakers that focused on trying to help producers and agritourism operators enhance their presence online, assisting agritourism business with their current offering, and encouraging more businesses to get involved with agritourism, with the end goal of positioning the town of Essex as an agritourism destination in Ontario. Next slide, please. So one of the recommendations that came out of that strategy was to develop an agritourism toolkit. This toolkit was designed to provide existing and aspiring agritourism business owners within the town of Essex with resources to develop new and improved agritourism experiences that meet or exceed visitor expectations. So anything from rules and regulations to providing information about market segments and ways that you could storytell or market to visitors about your experience, enhancing your online presence as an agritourism business, and providing agritourism businesses with some resources, worksheets, and information on funding as well. Next slide, please. So one of the key aspects within this toolkit is a planning requirements checklist. I'm not a planner, but we have an amazing team of planners and development services staff that we work with closely to develop this document and really look at our policies within our official plan to create a more welcoming environment for agritourism businesses and traditional farm operators that are looking to diversify their business and get into agritourism. So part of this worksheet is really looking at the amount of space on your property that can be used for the agritourism experience, whether you can use a portion of existing buildings or construct new buildings. What we're trying to do with this specific checklist is, for that pre-consultation, is giving us a better understanding of what exactly you want to do. So our planners and our development services staff can come prepared to the meeting and have a fruitful conversation about agritourism and really try to come to an understanding about what your development is all about. Next slide, please. So one of the aspects of the agritourism toolkit and one of the programs that we implemented back in 2017, which kind of paved the way for supporting farm operators and agritourism operators, was the County Road 50 Community Improvement Plan. Traditional community improvement plans, which I'm sure a lot of planners are aware of, really focus on commercial and industrial development. We wanted to incentivize farmers to really look at agritourism and diversifying their farm, and as a way of supporting them financially is providing incentive through a community improvement plan. This is Robin from Paglione Estate Winery here in Colchester. He was able to use some CIP funding for improving his patio, improving accommodation, and roadside signage. For us, it's really about supporting our producers, in a way of doing that through a community improvement plan has really big impact. Next slide, please. The other thing we're working on right now is the Agritourism Ambassador Program. So this is really, and you can see Robin's part of this as well, looking at having partners within the community. It's one thing to say agritourism is important to us as a municipality, but having operators within the community speak about how important agritourism is, and really working with up and coming operators or farmers that are looking at getting involved in agritourism, working with them directly. So I know I'm running out of time here, so I'll move on to the next slide. And next steps for us. So really continue to invest in infrastructure projects that support agritourism development. We're working on multi-million-dollar projects to extend bike lanes around a really crucial network of agritourism businesses along County Road 50. We continue to position the town of Essex as an agritourism destination in Ontario. Incentivize rural businesses that support the agritourism supply chain. There's a photo there in the middle of the Grove Motel, which was newly built in Colchester on a commercial piece of property. But those accommodations and developments really support the agritourism supply chain and agritourism operators. The overall goal here, I think, is to provide career opportunities to young farmers, reduce the consolidation of farms, and keep that generational farm within families and creating unique opportunities where youth can get involved in agriculture. The other thing is really enacting policies that recognize and support agritourism development, keeping that definition in the OP, and invest in placemaking. That was the one thing I wanted to touch on. We recently did a streetscape project in a little community where there's a lot of agritourism happening, and within the placemaking, really tying in that agricultural theme. So it's about creating placemaking and really setting up your destination for success, focusing on agritourism and supporting farmers within that realm of agriculture. So thank you to OFA and to OMAFRA, and yeah, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nelson. That was very informative. Now we're on to our next presenter, Meredith from Tourism Oxford. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me back today. It's nice to be here and to see all the presentations from the other regions in the province. So I am going to be moving quickly to respect time. So I work for Oxford County. If you go to the next slide. If you're not familiar with where we're located, we're right along Highway 401 where it meets Highway 403. You might know some of our urban centers, but you have to check out our rural areas. There's lots to talk about there, and we're kind of nestled right in between London, Waterloo, and Stratford. Next slide. So we have a very small team. We work at the County of Oxford. We're a team of 3. So we're the destination management organization for Oxford County. But I have to say that we work with so many partners, particularly regionally, Rural Oxford Economic Development, we work with on a regular basis, and Community Futures and the OCFA. For local projects, but then also we're working regionally, provincially, and federally now at this point as well, or sorry, nationwide, as we're part of the Great Taste of Canada. So next slide. So what do? We are the destination management organization. So in that role, we're looking at management of tourism. So not growth at any cost in tourism, but growth that suits the community and fits well with the community and makes it a great place to live and work. We do that through work and product development. So we're really supporting the businesses and developing and taking new product to market. That's coaching, training, etc., and offering collaborative opportunities for them to work together, which I'll highlight later. And then, of course, marketing all of those things to bring forward to the consumer as well. But one thing I do want to highlight is that we really work in partnership. So all of this is happening by working with a diverse group of people. And we focus on what we do best, which is tourism. So we are constantly referring people to the experts in economic development, planning, bylaw, public health, etc. We don't answer questions. We refer people to get their questions answered from the source and from the best source of information. Next slide. And our philosophy in tourism is authenticity. We're looking to develop tourism that's a good match for the community. That means working with our natural assets. That's our people, our place, and what both of those inspire in the community. Next. We also are interested in sustainability. We are a Green Step certified organization, and we're currently working on our destination certification. And we also recently received our Rainbow Registered certification last year from the Canadian Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce. And these are areas of focus and of interest to us because we want to provide a welcoming, sustainable community for all. Next. So the product that we're promoting in Oxford County, we're obviously a large agricultural area, and we have no matter where you go, you're never too far from your next stop. So we always say you're about 10 minutes away if you're doing rural from another place that you could check out, or if you're downtown, or your next community even is about 15 minutes away. So we really promote touring with the Tour Oxford brand, and you may have seen our highway signs for embracing our rural routes. So with that, we're really promoting people visiting multiple locations within a day, making a great time out. So by working with smaller attractions as well is a way for us to kind of spread the wealth across the community of where people are visiting. We also really promote cycling with road and with the Trans-Canada Trail. And obviously, culinary tourism is a huge part of the community. Next slide. So I mentioned that we do a lot of work in development. So for us, basically, that's everything from network readiness training, coaching, collaboration grants, and I'm going to provide some detail on a few of those if we go to the next slide. So for instance, we do a lot of workshops and training where we bring people together to talk about how they can work together. So, you know, we're talking about touring and people visiting multiple locations. How can you work with your neighbors? Do you know about your neighbors? This photo here, for example, is a session we held called Winter's Harvest. And this brought together over 60 food producers and restaurateurs to talk about how they could be using more local in the community and how they could partner together in the future. Next slide. Also, what we do, we're looking at supporting the businesses and elevating the experience they offer to the visitors. So everything is based on partnership criteria. So, for example, to have a free listing on the website, you have to meet a certain level of criteria that is going to meet the needs of what a visitor is expecting. So, do you have a website? Are you responding to your Google reviews? What a great advertising opportunity for you to do that, much further than if you were on a website, like the tourism site. Responding to your Google reviews is so important. And so this way also everybody's on a level playing field that's coming forward and putting the same effort in. And if we go to the next slide, I'm just going to highlight the Oxford County Cheese Trail. So this is a partnership and collaboration between over 30 businesses across Oxford County. It includes cheesemakers, restaurateurs, hotels, museums, artisans, who are all celebrating our cheese and dairy past and present. They've all signed an agreement and are meeting the criteria for the cheese trail, including being open a minimum of 3 days a week, 8 months of the year, and having an offer of a taste tour or takeaway for people to have on site for a whole year. They have the agreement for. And this has been a phenomenal program for Oxford County, which we have talked about before in a community of practice. So next slide. Another program that we do, we're not about duplicating activities, but we're looking at working together, as we said, to partner and focus on what we do best. So we were doing a culinary tourism program, but what we decided to do after doing a culinary strategy was we basically partnered with the OCFA, and we now do Oxford Fresh as a culinary and a farm gate program. Next slide. Another option that we do is we provide testing opportunities for people. So Orange Door Acres is a great example of that, where they participated in testing days to try a new program called Rural Routes, where they'd have people out to their location and 3 other locations within a short drive. And they were able to test out new ideas. Since then, they've expanded their farm to have a larger retail shop. They're actually doing the butchering of the birds when they come back from the abattoir, and they've added strawberries to their property. Next slide. Another opportunity that we do is grants. So we do that in partnership with Rural Oxford Economic Development and Community Futures, where we offer 3 small grants of $3,000 on an annual basis for people to enhance or provide a new tourism experience. The photo here is one of our first recipients, Greener Pastures Eco Farm, who made improvements at their site so that they could offer year-round tours to visitors. Next slide. And so we've been doing all of this work, and we are seeing the results of the investment and growth in this area. Basically, here's a photo of Golspie Dairy, which they had a small farm of about 50 cows. And what they've done is they've actually opened up and have a cheese factory now. This was last year. The year before that, Red Dragon Dairy opened up their sheep's milk cheese making facility. And then also I was just on the phone yesterday with another cheese factory that's coming to the area. So you can see the impact that the Oxford County Cheese Trail has had on the community. If we go to the next slide, I'll be just firing through these. This here is Perennial and Palette. So this is an artist who is now inviting people out to her farm, and they're actually learning the practice of watercolors with her. And if you're going to the Royal Winter Fair, you'll see her there because she's actually doing the poster for this year. But people can go out and learn about watercolors in a beautiful rural setting and gain an appreciation for the art form. Next slide. Tree to Table is David Schoenberger, who is a woodworker, and we worked with him to develop a tourism experience, which now I had an international visitor here and a travel writer, and they said this is the best experience they'd ever done. They go with him and they appreciate the Carolinian forest through a forest walk, and then they go into his shop and they actually make their own charcuterie board to bring home. Next slide. We also work with the museums, and I think this is so important. Everybody has rural museums. How can you help support them in making new products that support and celebrate the agriculture in the area? Norwich Museum now does a butter churning experience where you get to churn butter like the pioneers did, and then you get to eat it on fresh bakery bread and with local preserves. Next. Thames River Melons originally started as a small U-pick operation. They then expanded and moved the U-pick and adding different items onto that site, including apples, which they just started this year. They then added a bakery. They now have a food truck on site as well, serving up their beef on homemade buns, delicious smash burgers. And then they also have people come and harvest, then make a meal and dine al fresco with it. Next. Hayes Maple Syrup has opened up their farm where they previously weren't doing it, and they now offer breakfasts. And next slide. McKing's Flower Farm started with a flower stand at the end of the laneway and doing farmers markets. And we were so excited to see her continue to grow to the point where she now has a cafe on site and a more official space for her to offer her workshops, which were previously in a outbuilding. And she's also along the Trans-Canada Trail. Snyder's Family Farm continues to expand their season. If you haven't been, you've got to check out, they now offer Christmas trees on site. And one more is Terra Nova Nordic Spa. So this is a location that used to host a abattoir, and it's now a beautiful Nordic spa. And we just had a second Nordic spa open at a rural golf course in the area. And this spa is now has 20 employees. So that's it for me. Very quick. If you have any questions, please reach out. I'm happy to answer them for you.
Thank you so much, Meredith. That concludes our speaker portion of the COP. And now we are going to go over to Carolyn for some Q&A session with Slido.
Oh, wonderful. So I'll just ask if our speakers and Drew want to turn their cameras on, and we'll just go through the questions. Thank you to everybody for using Slido and being willing to to participate in that way. We really appreciate it. And we'll start with the first question, and I think we have about 15 minutes that we can use to answer questions. And so the first one, I'll maybe lead with Drew each time, and then if some of the panelists, if you have some input that you want to add to it from your experience in your community, just let me know. So when does an on-farm diversified use transition into a commercial use and trigger the need for a rezoning?
I'm going to kick things off here. Thanks, Carolyn. Hopefully you can hear me okay, everyone. So yeah, I've been attempting to answer some of these questions through the Q&A feature in Slido. I'm going to preface all of this with the fact that I'm doing this in a relatively quick way, and so you're getting kind of an unvarnished answer. It may not be a reflection necessarily of sort of a provincial position. It's more an interpretation you're getting from me as an OMAFRA staff person. So I'll preface it with that kind of disclaimer. But yeah, in this case, and I think I noted that this is actually a really good question. I would argue it makes a ton of sense that it's been voted up all the way to the top here, because it's one that we're faced with all the time. So I've attempted to answer it in Slido, but I'll just reiterate here that yeah, we do expect to see businesses grow, and as they grow and become successful, that may mean they need more space. Growing doesn't necessarily just mean more of an online presence or being able to vertically increase their ability as a business. But I think if they need more space, that may mean that you have to re-examine whether they still fit into the size and scale criteria that have been established locally. And I think it is a really hard conversation to have with a business that's established, that's a longstanding business in a community, about whether or not that location is still an appropriate location to be growing, or whether they may have needs that would be better satisfied in a designated settlement area boundary. So I mentioned higher order servicing, right? That's the one that we commonly see, where people are needing, more water Maybe they need access to septic or three-phase hydro, natural gas, some of the things that maybe aren't available in those rural or agricultural settings. And that's where we would turn to our economic development partners and see about trying to find sites that may meet the needs of those businesses. So yeah, it's not a straightforward answer. I think you have to evaluate almost every situation individually, but I'm going to turn things over to the panel to chip in where I maybe left some gaps.
Emily?
I'll jump in for sure. So at the county, I think typically where we would see a on-farm diversified use transition to a commercial use and trigger the need for rezoning is if we start going through some of those criteria within our zoning that align with the OMAFRA guidelines. So for instance, Drew mentioned, if it's going beyond the permitted size and scale, does it start impacting surrounding farm operations? Like what is the ability of the proponent to continue farming on site as well? And some of these really start to, illustrate as to whether or not it complements the use or the agricultural use on the property, or if it would better be suited in the settlement area, as Drew mentioned.
Great. Thank you. And for those of you who are asking questions and asking if we'll be sharing, we will be sharing the questions that were asked. We'll share the information, the recording, deck, all that will be shared after the session.
Can I just add one more thing to that, Carolyn? And thanks for that, Emily. I think also when the businesses are initially established is a really good time to be asking the proponents about what their business plans are. So do they have plans to grow in the next 5 to 10 years? Where do they see this business heading? I know you can't always predict that, but sometimes you can get a sense of whether the business is being designed for, maybe it's meeting a generational family need, right? And so it's going to be run by a son or daughter as part of the farm operation. And that's really as far as they anticipate it going. If it's viewed to be something bigger, that's maybe going to be, international distribution of farm products or something that maybe involves multiple employees outside of the farm family, then you can have those conversations about whether or not it's an appropriate site to be growing and investing in such a significant operation.
Great. Okay, I'll move to the next one if everyone's okay with that. The next question is, if the owners of an agricultural property are not active farmers, but rent the farm out, are they eligible for an OFDU, so an on-farm diversified use? Drew?
Yep. So I did reply to this one as well, Carolyn, but it's been voted up, so maybe worth spending a bit of time here verbally. And I invite the panelists to chime in here because this is an area where we actually have seen municipalities adopt local approaches that have been tailored beyond provincial policies. So at the provincial level, there is no requirement for it to be an owner-operator farm in order to meet the criteria of an OFDU. What we really view as being important is that the farm property is being farmed, that it would remain in farm production through the scale criteria, but who's doing the farming is not a provincial requirement. So I'll maybe see if any of the panelists have taken the approach that needs to be the case, but that's the provincial perspective.
Okay, Emily?
Yeah, so I think Brant is one of those municipalities that's kind of gone above and beyond just requiring that the property is an active agricultural use. We go as far as to, for the vast majority of our agricultural applications, ag-related, on-farm diversified use, even surplus farm building severances, we require the farm operator to be the applicant or the property owner as well. And that is because many of these policies have been designed with the intention of benefiting farmers and trying to retain farmers and provide those viability opportunities. And so we do require that, whether that's proof of official documentation that you have a registered farm business registration number, for new entrants, startup exemption letter from Agricor. And so essentially that is a preliminary requirement, and we identify that outright in our zoning, as well as part of the pre-consultation process. We do see quite a bit of interest from I'll say non-farmers moving into the rural area, wanting to start up businesses for whatever reason, tax rates, etc. wanting to rent the land. But I mean, that also has a cumulative effect over time. And so we've chosen we've made the decision to limit it to farm operations as we've defined it in our bylaw.
Okay, thanks. Anyone else want to chip in on that one before we move to the next? All right, thank you that's great. A provincial perspective and a local application was really helpful. So this is around the battery energy storage facilities that Helma had highlighted. What is the applicability of the Planning Act to battery energy storage facilities? Does it apply?
Right on. Yeah, I think I did attempt to reply here, but I can elaborate a bit on it. I was limited a bit in my time and in the characters that I was allowed to type here in Slido. So Planning Act obviously means provincial policy statement and being consistent with that, right? So one thing that we've been discussing recently with the advent of the request for proposals and more procurement around energy projects, including battery storage, is the definition of infrastructure that's contained in the provincial policy statement. And so I think many of these projects would align with the definition of infrastructure, meaning that these are electrical generation and transmission facilities. But when we look specifically at section 2.3 in the PPS, we know that there's a very limited list of permitted uses in a prime agricultural area. And of course, that's what we've gone through today. So ag uses, ag related uses and OFDUs. Infrastructure would be permitted through the context of limited non-residential, non-agricultural use. And so many municipalities are looking at planning approvals for energy projects in that context. So requiring demonstration of the criteria that are contained in section 2.3.6.1b. That's the section that talks about limited non-residential, non-agricultural uses. And it could be a range of applications, right? So we're seeing official plan amendments, zoning bylaw amendments, site plan control. And in some cases, municipalities have OPs and zoning bylaws that are silent on some of these types of projects just because of the history related to the Green Energy Act and how that's sort of come and gone. And so municipalities, I think, are having to take a second look at this issue. So yeah, that was a bit of a meandering answer, but I'll see if anyone else wants to kind of see how it's being dealt with in their municipalities on the panel.
Anyone else? Okay, on that note, I will move to the next one. So this one is, would small recreational tourist establishments, including a campsite, yurts, geodesic domes, or converted shipping container, be permitted as an OFDU?
You know what? I don't think I replied to this one, but I see it's been voted up. So there was another question very similar to this that I'm just going to essentially regurgitate the answer on, and I think it had to do with this hosting of whether they were in separate, detached, or even temporary accommodation structures. So we know that the PPS talks about agritourism uses and it's including limited accommodations on site. And I think the example we use is bed and breakfast, but it could equally include some of these more innovative types of limited accommodation on a farm. So an agritourism use is a nested term. It's nested within the definition of an OFDU. So it can indeed be permitted as an OFDU, provided that all the criteria that we've heard about this morning would be satisfied. So I think it's sort of a yes if type of an answer, and yeah, we're seeing all different types of accommodation being proposed, and much like we're seeing lots of different types of agricultural uses being proposed. So I don't know, Nelson or Emily or Meredith, if there's anything you want to add.
I would just add that, like even in Brant, our definition of OFDUs is quite broad, and we've, as I mentioned, taken it directly from the guidelines in the PPS. And so in our case, it would be considered a non-farm diversified use. One thing I would caution is that, so it is of course limited to size and scale. And then it's also important to remember there may be other requirements, like maybe from an engineering perspective or building code requirement, that might actually limit the feasibility of this to become an OFDU when you start having to add on different things or accommodate to bring them up to code. That might put you beyond that 2%, but I mean, that's all things that you could work out with the municipality.
Great. Nelson?
Yeah, I mean, we don't have any campsites or geodesic domes on agricultural property. We do have a site that's on a green district property that has yurts and supports, again, that agritourism ecosystem. In terms of on-farm stays within our municipality, most are kind of confined to bed and breakfasts. At the end of the day, I think agriculture is the primary operation here, and the thing that we should be valuing the most. If it ties back into agriculture somehow as an on-farm stay and there's an educational component, I think that's something that we would look at. But again, we don't want to lose necessarily the importance of agriculture when it comes to on-farm stays either. So
Great, thank you. Okay, next one. Can standalone wedding venues be considered an on-farm diversified use?
I've taken some creative interpretation of what I understand standalone to mean in the context of this question. So I'm envisioning a property that's been fragmented over time. So it could be a former rural residential property or something like a commercial industrial property that's now been acquired and established for an event venue. And I don't really like to just say wedding venues, because I think, as I mentioned in one of the other questions, like once these event venue facilities are established, they are used for lots of other things outside of just weddings. So the short answer is no, because you need to have that farm element in order for an event venue to be considered an OFDU. So it's the farm first, and then you diversify from the farm in order to meet the criteria of an OFDU. So if it were a 2 to 4 acre property where they had developed essentially a conference center, no, it would need to go through the criteria for a limited non-residential, non-agricultural use.
Okay.
I think I'll just add to Drew's comment there and put a plug in for a white paper that was done by my colleague Pam Dusling, the Golden Horseshoe Food and Farming Alliance, who looked at several case study examples of wedding venues or event barns specifically, so broader use, and just the difficulty in permitting those as on-farm diversified uses, even just beyond size and scale in terms of the cost requirements, building code requirements, safety, etc. So I'll put that link in the chat there, but just as another resource for folks online.
Thanks for mentioning that, Emily.
I can add to that briefly in terms of the town of Essex. So we're seeing wedding venue proposals becoming more and more popular. But I think back to Drew's point, I think first comes the agricultural operation. Then I use the winery example because we deal with a lot of wineries within our region. Growing the grapes, producing wine, having some kind of a venue for displaying that production can lead to potentially a wedding venue, but a standalone wedding venue would not be permitted within the confines of the permitted guidelines and within our municipality as well. And it's an ongoing issue that we're facing here locally as well.
For sure. Okay, I think we have time for maybe 2 more. I'm looking at Austin. Austin, you wave us down when you want to move to the next stages. So the next one, are indoor self-contained hydroponics, vertical farming buildings considered an agriculture use or simply an OFDU?
So yeah, I did attempt to answer this one as well. So look for that if you're wanting a written answer. I think one of the most interesting things about working in the ag sector is we continue to see the sector evolve, and there's lots of new and emerging agricultural uses that we're seeing, and I think they are challenging some of our thinking or traditional thinking around what an ag use is. So controlled environment agriculture, as described here, would constitute an agricultural use. We had some questions as well around other types of, other types of livestock or animals being raised. We see now insects being raised for protein. We're seeing insects being raised for beneficial use on crops as an IPM or integrated pest management best practice. So there are lots of things that are kind of pushing the boundaries around what an ag use or an ag related use is. And in this case, I would think it could fit as an ag use, noting that it's part of growing of crops. So the ag use definition in the PPS, from at least from a land use planning perspective, is quite broad. And I think this one would probably fit. But others may want to share any experiences they have with controlled environment or hydroponic agriculture.
I don't see anyone putting up their hands, so we'll leave it at that. Thank you, Drew. The next one is, are pick your own produce plots considered an agricultural use or an OFDU? Do special events, ticketed, pick your own theme, impact the use classification?
Thanks for the question, Kristen. I did pop an answer in through the reply, and I think what I noted is that it really is one of these situations that Helma's described where you could potentially have two uses on a site. And so in this situation, the area that's being used for the harvestable crop, whether it's pick your own or being harvested for wholesale or retail, I think would constitute an agricultural use. And so it wouldn't count against the lot coverage limitations attached to the OFDU, but there would be an OFDU present if there was a pick your own operation going alongside this. So then you would start to look at, okay, well, what elements of that OFDU or pick your own operation would we need to count towards the lot coverage? So I gave some examples: parking in the washrooms. Sometimes there's, indoor retail or even an event type hosting facility. But the field, whether it's an orchard or like a pumpkin field or whatever that's being picked, would still be an ag use. So hopefully that helps.
Okay. Emily?
I'll dive in and talk about Brant's approach here. So we do consider pick your own produce plots to be considered an agricultural use, as Drew mentioned. And so, but of course, like those would accompany an OFDU in terms of parking, market, or sort of any sort of related activities that would fall into that bucket. So we would limit it from that perspective. We actually have a unique provision in our bylaw that where we don't consider the sort of public facing aspect that's included in productive lands to count towards the OFDU, but we have put a cap on that in terms of a percentage, and that's just to help limit sort of the impact to the agricultural area. Because I mean, an entire farm, in that case, you could argue your entire farm would be a corn maze, right? What we're noticing, however, is that that's very difficult to regulate in terms of a like Planning Act perspective. I mean, we don't require permits for people to enter into a corn maze or anything like that. And we're actually noticing that it may not necessarily work for a lot of our larger scale agritourism operators. And so it is something that we will have continue having discussions with our stakeholders at the county and trying to go from there.
Great. Again, great local perspective on how you guys are approaching this. I think we might be out of time for questions, Austin. Am I right there?
And we wrap up here.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to each of you for answering the questions and providing feedback to the many pieces in that were. I think I saw something like 80. There's 85 questions that came in during that webinar. I will turn it back over to Austin. I'll just say there has been a poll pop up within your Slido that we're looking for some feedback on OMAFRA training, additional training or material that you would like to see. So we'd really appreciate. This is a ranking poll, so there's 11 options and you rank them. We do have an evaluation that's coming though that I will I will turn it over to Austin to wrap up, and I'll see whether maybe Nick can pull the evaluation link and drop it into the chat so folks can see that. Because if I move off of this, I'll close the poll. So go ahead, Austin.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for attending our community of practice. As always, our feedback is important to us. So please complete the survey in the provided link, one in the Slido, and then our Survey Monkey in our next wrap-up slide. If you would like more information on OFDUs after today's presentation, OFA does have a dedicated webpage to OFDUs that I linked in the chat. To close this COP, I'd like to thank our speakers, Helma Gertz, Nancy Rutherford, Emily Souza, Nelson Silvera, and Meredith Maywood. And as well, a special thanks to Drew Crinklaw for helping to answer some of the questions. So thanks so much, everyone. I hope this was informative and you've come away feeling better equipped with permitted uses on ag lands.